Colorado. Within our state boundaries is land once claimed by Spanish kings and Mexican governors. Although native people initially lived in the region, the first Europeans to visit came from Spain. Early Hispanic families moved north from New Mexico to settle in Colorado. During this program, we discover who the Hispanics are, where they came from, how they lived, and what they have contributed to the wonderful state of Colorado. Many explorers entered Colorado. Francisco de Coronado, a Spanish explorer looking for the mythical 7 golden cities of Cibola, may have crossed into Colorado in 1540. However, old Spanish records indicate that as far back as 1598, Juan de Onate reported gold discoveries in the San Luis Valley.
My timeline starts in 1500, and of course that's when the Spaniards started arriving in New Spain, which is now Mexico. By the 1520s, the conquest of Mexico was completed. And that's where the mestizo culture started. And then when they started doing the northward migration, of course there were native groups here, and so the mestizo culture was very developed by the time they got here. If you look at the timeline of settlement in this country, Jamestown, which is the first permanent settlement, was established in 1607. But the Spaniards were here in 1598. The Spaniards were very hard on the indigenous people in many ways. And so by 1680, the Pueblo people planned a revolt, and they actually drove the Spaniards out of their Pueblo lands. And the Spaniards went as far as El Paso, Texas, and then they weren't allowed to go back to Mexico because they were pretty much being forced to settle this area.
2 Franciscan priests entered Colorado in 1776. In their 10-man party was Captain Don Bernardo y Pacheco Mierra, an engineer and artist who drew the first surviving detailed map of Colorado. Who were the first settlers in Colorado?
We as Hispanics or Mexicans or Chicanos, we migrated north from the south. After the War of 1848, with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the border for us moved south. And a lot of people that I've spoken to think that we're all immigrants from Mexico, when actually we have a seniority here as Americans.
After winning independence from Spain in 1821, Mexico grew concerned about the northernmost limits of its territory. To reinforce Mexican claims for what is now part of Colorado, Governor Manuel Armijo of New Mexico made land grants to attract Hispanic settlers.
So the earliest villages were San Luis, and it wasn't named San Luis till probably the 1860s. It was always Culebra.
The town of San Luis, the oldest permanent settlement in Colorado, was established by the Sangre de Cristo grant in 1851. San Luis still uses its 1852 communal water ditch called an acequia.
What happened at the very beginning is that all the villages were called Culebra. They're trying to place people, say in San Acacio and in San Francisco and Chama. My home right now is in San Pedro, where I was born, San Pedro, Colorado. It was one of the earliest villages in La Culebra, established probably shortly after San Luis in the 1850s, mid-1850s.
We have 9 villages here, and one of them is San Francisco, and they also call it El Rito.
In 1848, Mexico surrendered this territory to the United States in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ended the Mexican War. Although the treaty guaranteed property rights of Mexican settlers, much land was stripped away from the original owners.
My family has lived there in the valley for several generations. We can probably go back 4 or 5 generations in the San Luis Valley.
Where else are Hispanics in Colorado from?
I'm from the northern part of Spain that people will identify as the Basque region of Spain, south of the Pyrenees, and about 50 to 100 miles from the French border.
All of my history of family come from Taos, New Mexico, and they migrated over in Ocate. And they had a piece of land there that they were deeded as a result of one of my great-great-grandfathers working with the Union Army.
I lived in San Francisco, California, very cosmopolitan, but summers here were like a free spirit. When I came to Grandma's house, I am living now in my grandmother's house, and I inherited this house actually.
Folks that migrated west from the east, well, they assume that the United States started with them. So when I was in school, I found it kind of funny, the people that I saw, like the fathers of our country that we refer to, George Washington and so on. I used to see those individuals in the history book, and I used to ask myself, if these people are the fathers of our country, how come none of them look like my parents?